Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joshua Hughes, and I am the chairperson of the Health and Wellness Ministry here at MUM. It's my pleasure to introduce to you for tonight's program Amy White um, to talk about holiday stress and grief. Um, she is a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Florida, and certified by the National Board of Certified Counselors and of the American Association of Christian Counselors. Her practical approach is inclusive in representing a wide range of worldviews and backgrounds. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Amy White.
Thank you, Joshua. It's really good to be with all of you tonight. We're going to be talking about holiday stress and grief and exploring steps that we can take to effectively manage those emotions. So we are in the throes of the holiday, are we not? And that often comes with expectations that others have of us and expectations we put on ourselves. Here's an expectation that my 6-year-old grandson recently communicated to his mom. He asked her if she would take him on a trip. And she said, "Oh, where do you want to go?" And he said, "I don't care where we go, but I want to travel in luxurious first class." And my daughter explained that first class is nice, but it's not really that different. And they've been on planes before. And he quickly responded. He said, "No, I want luxurious first class where I can lay down and have a pillow and have food served to me." And she said, "Well, that actually costs a lot of money." To which he said, "Well, can't you work harder?" Oh. And she quickly said, "No." Well, if you find that your shoulders are tensing up, your heart's maybe skipping a beat, you may be experiencing holiday stress. Remember that millions of dollars are spent to lure us into what we need to have to make the holidays great, from the gifts to the parties, to the tree and to outdoor decorations. And here's an example of what holiday stress can do to us. Anybody remember Christmas with the Griswolds? Take a look.
Are you out here for a reason, or are you just avoiding the family?
No, I still have a couple hundred more votes to check. In the meantime, I can light the Santa and the 8 tiny reindeer and the Merry Christmas sign. That should look good. Ready?
You want me to do the drum roll thing?
Oh, it's okay. Here goes nothing. I don't understand it. The house lights don't work, the floodlights don't work.
Is it plugged in?
I mean, you honestly think I would check thousands of tiny little lights if I wasn't sure the extension cord was plugged in?
What's all the yelling about?
What's going on here?
25,000 twinkle. What you doing, Bob?
I have the foggiest.
That's not good. That is just not good. Well, Christmas can bring with it the best of times and the worst of times, like we saw with the Griswolds. I do have to admit, the day after Thanksgiving, I cringe when I think about getting the decorations out of the attic and putting them all up. That's the worst of times. And then there's the expense of all of it, the traffic, the crowded stores, the gift you need to buy for that person that you just can't give them one more gift card because you've given so many. Then there's the online orders, which is where we all are these days, right? One couple ordered a kit for a treehouse and received plans for a sailboat. And they contacted the company to complain, and the company replied, "While we regret the inconvenience this mistake must have caused you, it's nothing compared to that of the man who is on a lake somewhere trying to sail your treehouse." Well, those expectations can create stress, and holiday expectations can affect all of us, old and young alike. Here are some of the symptoms that we see of stress. Holiday stress is very similar to ordinary stress. We can have anxiety, sadness. You can experience physical symptoms like headaches. You can have sleep problems, not falling asleep, waking up early, waking throughout the night, sleeping too much, and irritability. We do want to remember that not all stress is bad. There's something that we call eustress. That's the good stress. The optimal level of arousal that we need, that challenges us to get the things done that we want without diminishing our resources. Eustress can actually help us grow by building resilience, autonomy, developing positive feelings such as motivation and commitment and inspiration. The bad stress is called distress, and this can be performance hindering. Distress brings with it feelings of being overwhelmed and exhausted. Distress occurs when our physical, mental, and emotional resources don't seem to be adequate enough to meet the needs that we have. So how can we work toward minimizing or preventing the distress? There's several things we're going to look at. We want to identify and set boundaries and priorities. We want to plan ahead, establish a budget, go easy on social media, control stress. We don't want to be alone, and we want to choose the right attitude. So we're going to look at each of those in a little more detail, starting with establishing our priorities and setting boundaries where needed. We only have so much time, emotion, and energy to go around, right? On February 1st, when you look back at the holidays, what choices will you feel good about and which ones will you regret? That will give you a perspective on what you want to say yes to and what you want to say no to. Use this retroactive perspective to keep you informed about the choices you make. You want to think about who are the people and events that you want to give yourself to. If you're too tired and overwhelmed by saying yes too often, you won't enjoy any of them. So my lovely assistant, Dr. Bill White, who is also my husband, is going to do a little role play with me. I think you're going to have to come up and share the mic with me.
Well, I get paid the same amount as I do for doing the technical stuff.
Yeah, you do. Lunch tomorrow. So I want you to pretend that Bill and I aren't married. We're actually in a work setting, and we work together, married to different people, and you're going to come in on a scene and see what happens here. So I'm sitting in my office. Oh, hi, Bill. How are you?
A bit overwhelmed. Been working late. Got this holiday thing going. I've got kids going 5 different directions, and only 2 kids. And my wife, her expectations at this time of the year, it's a far reach for me.
Well, I have good news for you. My husband and I are throwing a party in 2 weeks. It's a small group. We've carefully chosen the people who want to be there, and we want you and your wife to come. You're going to love it.
I would love to be able to do that, but again, I'm just totally overwhelmed. I don't know if I can add one more thing to my schedule.
Well, I know, but I'm telling you that this will restore you, it will energize you. We're going to have such a good time. It will be the best event of the holidays, and you just cannot say no. I have to insist, you have to come. It just won't be the same without you. Come on, you can do it. Just say yes. Okay. Thank you, Dr. White. Was Bill able to set a boundary? Have you ever been in those situations where you could not say no for one reason or another? You want to think about that, and again, you focus on what matters to you, what you want to invest your energies in, and be willing to say no to those people, even if they might be a little disappointed. That's okay. I'll get over that, and you'll have a good holiday. You especially want to say no to those invitations that will actually drain you. They're not just one more thing, but they're draining. Especially if they're difficult scenarios where you go in thinking this is going to turn out badly, I'm going to feel bad after I leave, I don't like these people, they say mean things. You definitely don't want to attend those kinds of things. Let's talk about family for a minute, because that's part of the boundary setting, right? There's a tendency sometimes in some families for things to go sideways. We hear jokes about that from stand-up comedians all the time about the holidays. So it can be important to set some guidelines up front. A rule of thumb, for example, consider avoiding hot topics. Things like vaccinations, religion, politics. Save those subjects for a more appropriate, thoughtful time where you can have discussions and interactions. Now, just because you want to set that boundary doesn't mean everybody else will, right? So get ready. You can say up front, I think it would be great for all of us to just avoid those hot topics even before you show up. Just kind of let everybody know, let's just have a good time together. But let's say you get there and somebody starts it. What are you going to do? Any ideas? You can't throw a pie at them. That wouldn't be a good thing. Can you? Go ahead.
I have a very good friend in the neighborhood, and we don't see eye to eye on everything, most things, but politics is one we don't, and I know that. And it came up just one time, and I looked at him, I says, my friendship means too much to me to get involved in this, so I'd rather not talk about it. And we have not talked about it since.
Yeah, the whole idea of saying, that this isn't going to go well, and I care too much about you, so let's just table that. That's a great approach. If someone refuses to give it up, and you remind them, we've talked about this, remember we're not going to do that today, and they do it anyway, I think you can lovingly say, I'm going to step out of the room, or I'm going to go for a ride and I'll be back. You can make a decision not to partake in that. They may not like that, but you're going to be better off, because once those discussions starts, what happens? Emotions escalate, then it turns into conflict, defense, criticism, and you get up to this level, somebody's going to be hurt, and there's almost no going back. Any other suggestions on how to handle those kinds of situations? You can go to your cabin in the woods and not invite anybody.
I mean, just at home, we'll be sitting at the dinner table. She doesn't like to talk about politics. A little bit. And we'll discuss something, and I'll get the look, and I'll say, I'm done. And when I say I'm done, we don't discuss it anymore. But I got to say a few things that I wanted to say, and she understood that. And then I understood I don't want to press her.
So you've come to a mutual agreement of what's acceptable. You've drawn your boundary lines. Yeah, you've drawn your boundary lines. Good for you. The next thing we want to look at is the whole idea of planning. Ever hear the expression, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail? A lot of people rush into the holidays with a million things to do and never get a plan together for how they're going to get the most important things done. It's important to take a minute and identify what are your goals, needs, and expectations, and then develop a plan to make sure those are met. You can even consider setting up a timeline as to when each task needs to be done to kind of hold yourself accountable, even mark it on your calendar. This will help you stay on track. You'll feel more in control and less overwhelmed. Some people are really good at organization and structure and timelines, and some people are not. If you're one of the are nots, find somebody who is and ask for help. Have a partner in it. At least to identify that list of 1,000 things and bring it down to 50. What are the things that are most important, and then plan how you'll get that done. The other part of that is be okay if it doesn't all turn out perfectly, if you have to let some things go. It's not the time to stress over perfection. It's a time to be with people and to share the love of the holidays, right? Here's a big one. Budget. A lot of people enter the holidays with thinking of the ideal gift for every person, and then they start shopping and they see what the prices are. Well, it's only a little bit more than I thought I was going to spend. But cumulatively, how many of those gifts are just a little bit more? And they're putting more and more on the credit card. So a question to think about in June, do you really want to be paying off the gifts you bought in December? If you think about it, when you go back over history and you think of all your past Christmases, how many gifts do you actually remember that you got? Versus who are the people that were there, the memories that you shared, the times that you spent together. That's what really matters. Don't lose sight of that, and kind of educate younger people on that. Some people put a lot of pressure on themselves to buy the perfect gift. They stress over it. Why? Why does it have to be perfect? How many gifts do we receive that we're grateful for that someone just thought about us? It doesn't even matter what they gave us. So give that up. If someone would happen to be disappointed or critical or unappreciative of the gift that we give them, what should we do? We should be nice. We shouldn't throw it at them. But I think we shouldn't care, because that says more about them than us, doesn't it? I think we should be blessed by anything anybody gives us that they thought about us. So I think that's their problem. I know a very successful realtor, in business a long, long time, and she had a habit of buying small gifts for clients, consultants, customers, and she would always say, because people would say, well, what kind of gift and how much do you spend? And she would go, no, that doesn't matter. It can be a $2 gift card to Starbucks. It's the thought that counts. It's letting people know you appreciate them. That's what really matters. But in our materialistic culture, we've lost sight of that a lot. So some of it is being willing not to buy into what culture mandates, that we have to give a certain gift, a certain amount. Why? So those businesses can make a lot of money. That's why. I think my realtor friend was right. So determine what you can realistically spend, and if your budget is low, consider homemade gifts. I remember hearing one person talking on the radio. She was actually a radio personality, saying we had a disastrous year financially. There were medical bills, there was a flood in the house. It was just one of those years, and she said, I'm making cookies for everybody, and that's what they're getting. And I thought, good for you, lady, because instead of going in more debt, feeling more anxious, you set those boundaries. If it can't be a homemade gift, if you're not good at that, think about asking or giving an invitation for something later in the year. A great movie that's coming out in February. Commit to buying tickets and going. A picnic in the summer, a 4th of July celebration, or acts of service. I'll clean your house for you once. I'll watch your dog. I'll babysit. Those gifts are very much appreciated by people. We don't see a lot of that anymore, but those things are great. Let's talk for a minute about social media. That's the era we're living in. And it is overtaking a lot of our lives, especially younger people. The sad part is when we look at statistics and research on social media, unfortunately what we're seeing these days is more isolation, greater incidence of anxiety and depression, the highest suicide rate I think that we've ever had. I heard recently that 132 people in the United States commit suicide every day. That's astronomical. And it's especially higher in younger people than ever before. And a lot of people, there's many reasons for it, but one of them is social media. people are interacting on social media to see about people's lives, but not interacting face to face. So there's a tremendous sense of loneliness, even though we know more about people than we ever have. Social media also gives a very skewed perspective on people's lives. People may take 20 pictures before they put the best one on social media, and we never know the backstory. What happened to get that picture? How much conflict was there? What did they have to spend to get there? I mean, it's a misrepresentation of people's lives. And yet what happens is people look at that and they compare their own life. They're always eating at nice restaurants. They're always going on nice trips. They're happy. They're always getting along. That's not reality, and we compare ourselves and we fall short. So I think we have to be very aware of the impact of social media, and especially with our younger people, really talking to them about it and helping them see the bigger picture. Anybody have any thoughts on social media and experiences of your own, things that you've seen? Because this is the era that we're in. We were talking earlier, for those of us over a certain age, before social media, we didn't have any of this. It's a whole different world. Any other thoughts on that?
There's a lot of bullying online.
A lot of online
And
bullying.
If it's something, if I wanted to bully you, it's something I would not say to your face. But being anonymous, I can do that.
See, isn't that an
Makes
interesting
you strong.
dynamic? People increase their anger, bullying, criticisms because it can be anonymous or you're not face to face. It's like it's not even reality. And yet the person receiving that, it's very much reality. It's very painful. Yeah, we have to be careful of that. The bottom line is we all know every life has highs and lows, successes and failures. That's part of being human. We also want to work on controlling our stress by literally slowing down. I recently purchased a gift for my son-in-law. I wasn't sure if he would like it for Christmas. So I took a picture of it, sent it to my daughter. I said, "Do you think he'll like this?" And she said, "I like it." She said, "But honestly, I don't think he'll ever wear it." So I said, "All right, I'll take it back." So I get in my car, I'm gonna rush it back, and in between meetings, this, that, and the other. On the way, there's a Goodwill bin. I have a bag in my car that's been, I said, "Oh, right here, I'm gonna throw it." Well, yeah, you're saying that because you know what happened. I threw the shirt I was going to return in the Goodwill bin, got my car, and there were my clothes for Goodwill. I went, man. So I looked in the bin, and it was relatively full. My bag, I could see it, was in the back, so I got my umbrella out of the car. And I'm trying to fish out the bag, and I got it. And I thought when I got my car, if anybody's watching me, they think I am a desperate human being. But I also sat down and said, okay, right now, take a breath. Just stop. Because those are the things I do when I'm going 90 miles an hour and I'm hurrying. And it's because I've had other consequences when I'm in that mode. I said, stop before something really bad or a really big mistake happens. So it was a message to me to slow down. When you're feeling stressed, you also want to check in with yourself. Think about a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. When you have all those feelings, take a minute and give yourself a number. Where are you on the stress scale? If you're 5 or over, you want to bring that down because that builds on itself. The higher it is, the harder it is to get it down. How do you do that? Well, we can do several things. First, find a quiet place. Start by taking 1 or 2 minutes to do some deep breathing. Did anybody ever hear of 4 square breathing? It's a technique that the Navy SEALs actually use it. Think of, with your finger, drawing 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a square. On the first line, you breathe in slowly on the count of 4. The second line, you exhale. In, exhale. You do that 2 times. So it's 4 square breathings. If you take your finger and actually do the squares on your arm or your leg, it's a physical touch. That's a grounding technique. And that brings you out of the emotion and into a physical reality and can also help bring that stress level down. Something else that you can work on is relaxation. And you start with larger muscle groups, starting with your head and your neck, and you literally tense it as tight as you can. And then you slowly release it. Shoulders tense all the way down. While you're doing that, you can close your eyes and envision a favorite place that you have, something with that beautiful picture up there. It's amazing how much these things work, and it only takes a couple of minutes. One thing to keep in mind, when our anxiety level increases, our emotions increase. When our emotions increase, we have physiological responses. In couples counseling, for example, I don't do this, but some counselors with couples who are in a lot of conflict actually have them wear a pulse ox where it measures your heart rate. It beeps at 100 when emotions are rising, things are escalating, and that's the timeout sign. Because once your heart rate gets to 100 or above, due to anxiety and stress, the blood is not flowing to the frontal cortex anymore, which is where we analyze, problem solve, understand, and interpret. It's going to the back part of your brain, which is flight, fight, or freeze. So when you're in that place, and you're trying to convey logical information to somebody to help them understand, do you think they're going to get it? No. They don't have the capacity at that point. You've got to bring that down. So that technique can be very helpful, not just for marital counseling when people are in conflict, but for managing our own stress. Any thoughts or comments about that?
On the muscle relaxation, I've used that when I've had trouble falling asleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the way the technique was described was kind of start at your toes and think of them as really heavy.
Good
Like
idea.
they're way down and then come up to your heels, and so you're kind of, I guess, putting asleep your body as
Right.
you go. But
Yeah.
I found that helpful at times.
Great.
It's so heavy you're sinking into the bed.
Yeah. The deep breathing is also helpful, and a lot of people use that as a technique when they're having trouble sleeping. But you do it slower and for a longer count. So you're breathing in, counting up to 8, holding it 4 to 8, exhaling 4 to 8. And it's deep belly breathing. So it's not shallow. It's really breathing, filling your lungs and exhaling. And it really is interesting. It's often very helpful, especially to fall asleep. People use that. I think that's a good technique. By the way, if you have a lot of anxiety and your list is going through your mind when you're going to sleep, use a phone or tablet or paper and pencil, write it down beside your bed. There's something amazing about writing things down. You can let go of it because you know you're not going to forget it. That's an old technique, but it works. You wanted to mention something?
There's an app I have on my phone. She turned me on to it. We both actually. And when I feel like this, if I happen to be at home, it's only 15 minutes. Headspace. And this gentleman that does this studied under the monks.
Mm.
And by the time you go through the 15 minutes, it's like,
Great.
I'm weak, I'm relaxed.
Right, that's
And only
great.
15 minutes.
Yeah, there's several of those kinds of apps. I think they can be very effective. You have to find what's right for you. Not everything works for everybody. For some people, meditation, scripture reading, prayer. For some people, it's doing a bunch of these or varying it from day to day. But we want to bring that anxiety down. But stress increases our cortisol levels as well. Cortisol's not bad. It's actually good for us unless it goes too high, and then it's damaging. So it's not just what we're feeling emotionally, it's what's happening physiologically when we're dealing with a lot of stress. It's very important to manage that and bring it down. At the end of all that, take a minute and reassess. Okay, how did I get here? Why am I so stressed? What's important for me to do today? I don't have to think about what's due in 2 weeks, what's going to happen in 3 weeks. What's for today? What do I need to plan on for tomorrow? And try to take small chunks. We can't usually take giant leaps. It doesn't work very well. But small steps cumulatively make a huge difference. So stay in the small steps and you can reach your goal. Don't minimize the value of good nutrition, exercise, and sleep that we mentioned. Taking care of self is one of the best ways to manage stress. Exercise is a great stress reliever. I can think of multiple times in my career when I come home from work, super stressed, you know what those work days can be like. Go for a walk, go for a bike ride, come home. Did anything change? No. I'm not so stressed anymore. I'll be there tomorrow. I know what I have to do. It's amazing how much exercise can help. And again, physiologically, when we get our heart rate up high enough, our body starts producing those endorphins, and those endorphins are those feel-good hormones. So our body responds to that as well. The holidays can be lonely for some people, especially for those folks who are not living near family. So what do we do about that? It's important to take initiative and make choices. Choose who your family will be at Christmas. Connect with those around you, whether it's your church family, people at work, people where you live. Connect with some of those people. It doesn't have to be 100. It can be 1 or 2, and it can make all the difference in the world. Invite a friend to coffee. It doesn't have to be spending $200 to get down to the Benedum. I have coffee and donuts. Well, I should mention the donut word. That's the fat food. We're trying to eat healthy, so forget I said that. Get engaged in meaningful acts of service, volunteering somewhere. Along the way, our family has a lot of traditions around holidays, so the idea of not being with family, I just can't get there. But I've talked to people who have said, we spend half the day serving in a soup kitchen. We spend half the day volunteering here or there, and it's the best thing we do at Christmas. I wish I had the guts to do it because I think it's probably true, but I love my traditions, so I don't give them up. But that's an option for connecting and feeling good about the holiday when you're not near family. The other thing we can do is really think about our mindset and our attitude so we can build that good eustress and decrease that distress. Chuck Swindoll, if you've ever heard of him, great pastor in his 80s now, one of my favorites all time, I still listen to him. He says, check your attitude. Here's what he says. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It's more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people say or do. The remarkable thing is, we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for the day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me, and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. I had a situation at work once where I was in human resources, training and development, that kind of stuff. And there was one employee who was just a thorn in my side. This person was difficult. And this person was objectively difficult. It wasn't me just being a wimp. So for the 100th time, this employee comes in my office and does this employee's thing, leaves, and my assistant comes in, and I said, I think I'm going to have an attitude. And here's what my assistant said to me. I love this woman. She said, well, Amy, it is a choice, isn't it? And I went, put in my place. Yes, ma'am. But I never forgot that because it really rung home. And I thought, you know what, she was right. What am I doing? Why am I going to allow this difficult employee to have power over me and control the rest of my day by me getting an attitude and being grumpy and mad at the world? I never forgot it. I think she was right on. So how do we change our attitude? We definitely want to be intentional and focus on the positive. Think about the joyful Christmas music. By the end of Christmas, we're usually all sick of it. But when it comes on and we're listening to it, it's beautiful and it's wonderful. As you're listening, really listen to the words. Think about those songs from Christmases, the same song Christmases past. Who was there? Where did you sing it? What church did you go to? Enjoy the memories of it. Enjoy the smells of the holiday. Lots of wonderful things cooking, the pine needles, the aroma of the Christmas candles, taking the bright lights and decorations, go for a ride around the neighborhood. We used to do that all the time when we were little. People don't do that as much anymore. It's like, take a break, go out and look at the Christmas lights, and be intentional about being present, mind, body, and soul. Don't just hit rewind and do Christmas again the same way you did it last year and the year before that and the year before that. Think of it anew. Be really connected with the people and what's happening around you. Choose to be fully engaged in the moment. Daily, maybe at the end of the day, make a commitment to list 3 things you're grateful for. Not the expectations that weren't met, not the deadlines you didn't meet, not the people that didn't get what they wanted or give you what they wanted. Put all that aside. What were 3 things today that I'm grateful for? And they can be very small things. When you focus on gratitude, it's amazing how much that affects your attitude. In 1 Thessalonians 5:18, the Apostle Paul said, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you." I think there's an important little word in here. Paul did not say, "For all things be grateful." He said, "In all things be grateful." Our joy can be evident when things are going well and when they're not, if we choose our attitude. Here's a familiar prayer some of you may have heard from an anonymous soldier. I think it speaks well of what we're talking about. "I ask God for strength that I might achieve. I was made weak that I might learn to humbly obey. I ask for health that I might do great things. I was given infirmity that I might do better things. I ask for riches that I might be happy. I was given poverty that I might be wise. I ask for all the things that I might enjoy life. I was given life that I might enjoy all things. I got nothing I asked for, but everything I hoped for. Despite myself, my prayers were answered. I am amongst all men richly blessed." Isn't that beautiful? Don't we all wish we could say that every day and remember it? But we don't. We go sideways. But we want to come back to that. We want to get that attitude right and think from that perspective. We don't want to lose sight of what matters the most. And especially at Christmas, why are we celebrating? Who are we celebrating with? I think back to a Christmas long ago. I was 13 years old and I was in junior high, and back then, it's probably still true today, certain styles and fads go around, and the popular girls were all wearing these black and white check dresses. A little bit different, but it was a style, and with all the accessories. So I said to my mom, "That's what I want for Christmas. I want a black and white check dress. I don't need anything else. I don't care about anything else. I only want that dress." And I'm sure I said it to her more than once. Well, under the tree one day appeared a gift, and it had my name on it for Christmas. And the box was like this, and I thought, I got it. I got my dress. And I was so excited for Christmas morning. Hurriedly unwrapped my box, and I opened it up, and there was a red quilted robe in my box. I did try to hide my disappointment, but here's what happened. The following June, my mother passed away from her battle with colon cancer. I have so often thought of that robe, and I still have a picture of myself in it on the piano bench from when I was 13. I don't regret not getting that dress for one day. Instead, what I think about is my mom, in the height of her illness, taking the time to buy me a gift. And this was well before online shopping and Amazon and Target and Walmart's across the landscape. In her illness, she went out to find me something that she thought I would like and to bless me. This memory often reminds me to keep my head on straight. This leads us to exploring a difficult topic, and that is grief during the holidays. I don't think there is anything more difficult or disruptive than the loss of someone that we love. Yet it comes to all of us, doesn't it? The death of someone close to us and the life changes that follow can create significant stress. When our loss is fresh, we may feel numb, in disbelief, or as if we're on automatic pilot. This is actually normal because we're in some form of shock. It's our body's defense mechanism protecting us from the full emotional impact of the loss until we're ready to manage it. We may feel sadness, despair, we may feel forlorn, angry, a sense of injustice, helplessness, alone, and these emotions can go from mild to intense. One woman I know would be hit with these intense feelings. She would get in her car and start driving, make sure all the windows were up, and she would just scream at the top of her lungs. And it was her way of trying to manage these intense, overwhelming emotions. I don't think there was anything wrong with that, as long as she didn't go on the highway 80 miles an hour. Be careful. We can sometimes be caught off guard by emotional responses when something unexpected triggers a memory or a new awareness of loss. Grief often comes in waves. We may feel, fine, okay, I've got it. I'm past that. I know this is going to be hard, but I can handle it. Then all of a sudden we're not. And it might be in the fresh produce aisle at Giant Eagle. You never know when it's going to hit. These feelings can come and go. They can be short or they can be prolonged. This is all a natural part of the grieving process. Here is what C.S. Lewis said following the premature death of his beloved wife, Joy, who he actually married later in life. No one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There's a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting, yet I want others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not me. I have no photograph of her that's any good. I cannot see her face distinctly in my imagination. Yet the odd face of some stranger seen in a crowd this morning may come before me in vivid perfection the moment I close my eyes tonight. No doubt the explanation is simple enough. We have seen the faces of those we know best so variously, from so many angles, in so many lights, with so many expressions, waking, sleeping, laughing, crying, eating, talking, thinking, that all the impressions crowd into our memory together and cancel out into a mere blur. But her voice is still vivid, the remembered voice that can turn me at any moment to a whimpering child. What a great expression of life in grief. I remember talking to a young woman who unexpectedly lost her mom and then found out that her brother had terminal cancer within a week, and you're there, right? And she said, I went outside, my neighbor said, oh, I'm sorry to hear the sad news. She said, I'm going to have to put my dog to sleep, and I feel so bad about it. And this woman I was talking to said, what I wanted to say to her was, shut up. It's a dog. But people are insensitive, they're out of touch. But her response, I think, was quite understandable. It's like, lady, you don't have a clue what I'm going through. How dare you talk to me about something so trivial as your dog? Not to that woman, it wasn't trivial, but it was in the scope of what she was dealing with. Perhaps some of the things that we are talking about describe where you are. It may not even be the first year. Grief is long-term. The intensity of the emotions die down, but the missing of the person never stops, right? Grief can be long, and it's especially powerful this time of year. For all of us, it's important to remember, not all loss is the same. Not all grief is the same. And not everyone deals with grief in the same way. This is what makes grief complicated and unique. We never want to assume because we've gone through a loss that we understand what somebody else is going through. No, we don't. We have a little bit of insight, but we don't know what's all involved for them. They have their own history, their own events, their own experiences, and it might be very different. Grief is also not an illness from which we recover. I hate the word closure, and people use it all the time. You need to find closure. You don't find closure on deep death and grief. Instead, we adapt, and our loss becomes a meaningful chapter in our life story. But we don't have closure on it. The truth is we were not made for death. We are made in God's image, and He was He has placed eternity in all of our hearts. Death is a consequence of the fall. And so when it hits us so hard, we need to remember that we live in a fallen, broken world. And this is part of what we're experiencing in that fallen, broken world. Death is an assault, and it flies in the face of what we desire, what we need, and what we expect. Author Ernest Becker wrote that panic comes from death. Death is irreducibly unpredictable and inexorable, impossible to stop or prevent. We can find comfort in knowing that our God knows what it is to grieve. On the cross, he suffered the agony of death and separation from his own family, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And he did that for us. He came to die that we might have eternal life and get reconnected with those we love. His death satisfied the debt of our sin. While we can know all of that intellectually, when we are experiencing the loss emotionally, we lose sight of all of that. We're walking the path of suffering and fighting hard not to become bitter, despondent, and broken. Our Western culture also does not deal with death and dying very well. We were talking about this earlier. If you think back into the 1800s, maybe up to 1900, early 1900s and prior, when people got sick, they were cared for in the home. People were familiar with illness. When they died, where was the funeral? In the living room. People experienced death and dying. With the medicalization of America, people began being whisked off to the hospital, whisked to the funeral parlor. And it's like, what's going on? What is this illness stuff? What is this death and dying? And our kids are even further removed from it than we were. So we want to be talking to one another about grief and death and dying. It is a normal part of life in one way, but it's abnormal based on how we're made and what we long for. Some people feel that they need to insulate until it passes. Some people will expect you to move on, and quickly if you don't mind. But this doesn't line up with our humanness. In the Old Testament, the prophet Jeremiah was called to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. He did so, and scripture describes Nehemiah building the wall with one hand and holding a sword in the other to fight off the enemy if needed. I think we need to be like Nehemiah when we're walking through grief. We have to work at rebuilding our life until we feel alive again, because we don't when we're in the throes of grief. At the same time, we have to be fighting off the evil one. Grief is a time that I believe Satan can get a real foothold in us emotionally and spiritually, because guess what he wants? He wants us to not like God. He wants us to not think about the future. He wants us to be mad. He wants to keep us there. I think of a story. It was on 48 Hours, 2020, one of their shows a while back. It was a terrible story. It was a couple, they were in their home. The house caught fire, and it ramped up quickly. And so the husband got out, the wife did not. The firemen came. They tried very hard to get it all out. And the husband actually described he had her hand and somehow lost it. He could not even see where she was to get it again. That's tragic. It's terrible. But what was equally as heartbreaking to me, when you heard the whole story, it really did seem like the firefighters did everything they could. It was just an impossible situation. The man sued the fire company. He lost. He was still bitter and angry. And I thought, Satan's got a hold of you. I mean, how can we help him come back to life and recover and get past that? He's in the throes of anger and bitterness. And I think we have to watch out for that when we're in those times. Death, this adversity, can actually pull us into a deeper reality of God's love if we're open to that. Tim Keller writes in his excellent book, one of the best books I ever read on pain and suffering. It's called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. One of the main ways we move from abstract knowledge about God to a personal encounter with him as a living reality is through the furnace of affliction. Think of the story of Joseph. We know the end result, but think of all Joseph went through, left by his brothers, falsely imprisoned, all these things that happened to him. And yet God brought him through that into really saving his people from famine. But he didn't know that the day his brothers left him. In some ways, we have to be willing to think big picture. There will be an end to this, but where do we want to land? It's hard to do it when it goes with the emotion, though. C.S. Lewis wrote, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. David's words in Psalm 34:18 remind us the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I think that's a pretty powerful word, crushed. Imagine crushing something, what it looks like. It's in pieces. And you think, how could you ever rebuild that? It's crushed, but God has the power to do that if we're willing. David's words do not suggest that we aren't filled with great emotion and that there's not a long path to getting through it. He is simply reminding us we are not alone in it, and our emotions don't have to have the final word. In the Old Testament, the prophet Jeremiah, the whole book of Jeremiah, talks about what God's going to do to this disobedient people of Israel. It is not a happy book, and God makes it clear there's nothing you're going to tell me that's going to change my mind. It's going to be desolation and not a real quick wipeout. There's going to be brutal attacks. It's awful when you read it, to think about it. The book that follows Jeremiah is the book of Lamentations, and it's Jeremiah lamenting over what he knows is going to happen. It's a sobering book as well. Lamentations is only 5 chapters in length. It's a short book, but Jeremiah cries out in deep despair what he feels over the nation and the future. But he recognizes God is holy and there will ultimately be redemption. Like Jeremiah, when we are heavily into our pain and loss, we can't see what's ahead and we are consumed by our emotions. We want to remember that God understands and he invites us to lament, just like Jeremiah did. David also offers his laments in the Psalms. He shares the depths of his emotions without reservation. He is angry and he screams and he cries to the God that he loves. Remember, David is the one that was called a man after God's own heart. This is that guy yelling at God. Lamenting was what God was calling David to do because God is a relational being. He wants us to draw into him. He wants to hear our lament. Lamenting can lead us to God's mercy and keep us from becoming those bitter, resentful people. There's another book called Dark Clouds and Deep Mercy, also an excellent book. And it is talking about the process of lamenting. Not a lot of people, when you hear Sunday morning sermons, go to retreats, how many of you have ever heard anybody preach on the book of Lamentations? Never. It's a very important book, and it's in there for a reason, so that we read and learn and understand what lamenting is about and that God calls us and wants us to lament. That's the process of getting through those emotions and bringing us back to him. We can bring our pain, our questions, our frustrations, our grief, and our complaints to God. He's big enough to take it, and he invites us to do it. We definitely want to take time to lament and to make our laments personal, not just some general, gee, God, I'm mad today. What are you mad about? What were you mad about yesterday? What are you thinking about? Let it all out. It can be very helpful to journal some of those things as well, if you like journaling. It can be helpful to lament with somebody. If you have someone that's a good listener and is not going to just sit there and give you solutions, because you're not looking for solutions right then. You're looking to process that grief. In that lament, we can also boldly ask God for help and restoration and the ability to follow through on the choices we know we need to make to move forward, because when we're in the throes of that grief, what do we want to do? Nothing. So when we are told, move your baby finger, you can do that today, we want to be able to move it, because tomorrow we might be able to move our hand, and then we might be able to stand up. We can choose to trust that God is at work and has a plan for our future, and as He promises, a plan for good and not for evil, even if we aren't feeling God's presence at the moment. I've talked to so many people in the throes of grief that say, where is God? I don't feel Him. I don't see Him here. Why has He abandoned me? Here I am in this awful place and I'm alone. It's normal to feel that way. It goes with the territory. But we can choose to not let those emotions control us as we work through them. We can read scripture, even if they're dry and have no emotional response in our heart. Hearing those truths over and over again can give us the evidence and reminder of who God is, even if we're struggling to believe it. You know that old expression, fake it till you make it? Sometimes we've got to fake it till we make it. This can also create a hedge of protection, again, against the evil one who longs to get a foothold in our thoughts and emotions. We can remind ourselves that we live in a broken, fallen world, and that's why this loss, this death has occurred. But God is still in control, and He does work out all things for good in His purposes. It is important to remember that bereavement, all the things we're talking about, although difficult, is normal and a healthy process. Sometimes people take all those feelings, put a wall up, stuff them, and close the door. Well, guess what's going to happen to them down the road? They're going to be isolated, they're going to be non-relational, they're going to be sick, they're going to have all kinds of illnesses. You want to mention something? I thought you put your hand up. Yeah. Another thing to think about in these times, a lot of people are very uncomfortable when people go through a loss and are grieving. People show up for the funeral, for the burial, for the memorial service, and there's hugs and there's kisses, and then a week later they're gone, and they don't want to talk about it anymore. They don't want to share about it. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do, and we feel hurt and alone. It's understandable, but we want to be reaching out. Who are the 1, 2, or 3 people that you can say, I need you to be on my team. I need you to walk with me. Part of it is understanding that they don't know what to do. So when we feel like we're mad at them, we're just angry and how could they leave us, we want to challenge that a little bit. They probably feel inadequate and helpless. So reach out and let them in. There are concrete steps we can take to help us in our grief. Talk about each one of these a little bit. We just talked about the whole process of lamenting. But loss also creates a time of transition. We will be discovering anew who we are now, and that can be unsettling and stressful. Swiss psychologist back in the 50s, Jean Piaget, wrote, when death occurs, the self that is formed by and in the relationship to the deceased is lost, at least in the context of what was possible before. What is mourned when someone dies is both the lost relationship and the self as reflected in that relationship. That part of us that relates a certain way to that person can't do that anymore, and it's a loss. In the book Living with Grief, a year after her husband died, a widow says, I know I am still my children's mother. I am still a grandmother, but I feel like I don't know who I am anymore now that Jim is dead. If I am not his wife, who am I? When someone we love is gone, that part of us in that relationship feels gone too, and it's understandable. It's a time in working through that grief to be reaching out and experience ourselves in relationships with trusted people so that we feel connected again. We also don't want to be a lone ranger. Isolation can become a prison. The longer you isolate, the harder it is to get out of it. We have to be careful about that. Research has shown the most critical factor affecting our physical, emotional, and spiritual health is relationships. Harvard put a book out, I think it was last year, called The Good Life. It was the results of a long-term longitudinal study that they started in the 40s with 2 groups of young men, one at Harvard and one in an inner city area in that neighborhood. They interviewed them, they asked questions, they kept repeating it every so often, and their children. And this book is the results. It's very interesting, but they say up front, kind of spoiler alert, we're going to tell you what is the number one thing that makes people happy. It's relationships. We can't lose sight of that. Pastor Chuck Swindoll again says it this way: nobody is a whole chain. Each one is a link. Take away one link and the chain is broken. Nobody is a whole team. Each one is a player. Take away one player and the game is forfeited. Nobody is a whole orchestra. Each one is a musician. Take away one musician and the symphony is incomplete. We need each other. You need someone and someone needs you. Isolated islands or not, we give and take, confess and forgive, reach out and embrace. I think of a man that we know, very sad situation in his 50s, who lost his wife to COVID when it was in the initial strain, and it was so dire. Won't go into the details of the tragedy he experienced, but here he is afterwards. He not only lost his wife, but he didn't know how to do laundry. He didn't know how to cook. So here he is, activities of daily living, and he's overwhelmed. He had to reach out to people and say, I need you. I need you to teach me. I need you to help me. And over time they did. Did that take away all his grief? Absolutely not. Did it help him to function a little better? Yes. So when we're in the throes of grief for the things that we don't know how to do now, somebody did them for us, we need to ask for help. I think of another man who had a significant loss and was actually not doing well emotionally at all. He asked 7 of his friends to lunch, and he let them know that he knew he was in trouble. He asked each of them to commit to 1 meal a week with him, either breakfast, lunch, or dinner, all on a different day. That way, he knew he would have a connection every day, and someone would hold him accountable. Well, his friends agreed to do so. Months later, when he was in a strong place, he was convinced that that support is what got him through that valley and helped him to come out the other side and return really to the land of the living. We cannot minimize the value of relationships. We want to ask for help when we need it. We also want to maintain our spiritual life. It's easy to sit here and talk about that and say it. It's so much harder to do because when we come to church on good days is a worshipful, emotional experience. And so many people find when they've lost a loved one, they come to church and they sit in the last pew because they may not even get through the opening prayer or the first hymn before they're falling apart. And maybe that goes on for a while. I think it's still important to show up and to keep trying because it's connection with God, with who He is, with the people in the community. I think for all of us, if we know someone who's gone through loss, we want to invite them to come to church if they've been absent for a while. We want to maybe pick them up, take them to lunch afterward, give them a hug out in the narthex if they only made it for 5 minutes. Nobody's going to care if you walk out when you see them leave and give them a hug and then go back in. A study by a gentleman named Koenig and his colleagues showed for those over age 64 who attended weekly religious services, the relative hazard of mortality was reduced by 50% for women and 40% for men. It's a big impact. Interestingly, males are less likely to participate in religious services and twice as likely as females to die after the loss of a spouse. I think there's a correlation there. During the holidays, we also might want to consider how we can honor the one that we lost, if the person's ready to do so. Again, everyone grieves differently. There's a timeline for everything. We want to be sensitive, but possibly take time to reflect on special memories, even if tears count. Now, that might not happen in a group of 15, but maybe in a group of 2 it could. Some people set an empty chair at the table and a picture of the person to remember that person. These things are painful and they're bittersweet, but they can be healing and helpful. Sometimes you can go through old photograph books together, because here's one of the things, we talked about people not knowing how to deal with grief and loss. The person that has lost a person that they love deeply, as days go on, it feels more and more like they're leaving that person behind. It's painful, and when you look at photographs and talk, they're back in your life. They're part of your memory, your chapter. You're reliving it, and it's so wonderful to share that with somebody. Some people say, don't bring the pictures out, don't talk. And I say, well, if they don't want that, don't do it. But otherwise, bring them out. Talk about it, share those good experiences. Help them remember and validate the person that they loved. Finally, we've kind of alluded to this. It's so important to just do the next thing. If it's laundry, do laundry. You're not going to be climbing mountains. If it's getting the car washed, get the car washed, put gas in the car, run the vacuum, go get milk at the store. Resist sleeping in and taking long naps as much as possible. Stay with a regular schedule. Try not to give up exercise. If you haven't done it, get back into it. Your body will again produce those endorphins, which can help. Plus, if you go to things like group exercise, it can be a time of fellowship and connecting. And you don't have to talk to anybody there about what's going on in your life if you don't want, but it's a time not to be alone. If you know someone who's lost someone, consider sending a card, making a phone call, stopping by, sending a text. I remember a time in my life and a loss of someone very significant to me. I didn't want to talk to anybody, just like C.S. Lewis talked about. You all talk, but leave me out of it. So many people sent me cards. I found myself looking forward to going to the mailbox every day, hoping that there would be a card. I didn't care what it said. It just meant somebody was thinking about me and I wasn't by myself. It was critical for me at that time period to get through that phase of grief. Don't hesitate. Any small gesture makes someone feel they're not alone, and that they're loved and cared for. When we do spend time with somebody who's grieving, we want to be really careful what we say. I heard the story of a man who lost his wife, and two friends came over. The first one came over, sat beside him for an hour on the front porch, and kindly and lovingly just went through a lot of scripture verses that were very kind and nice. The next day, a second friend came over, sat on the front porch, held his hand, didn't say hardly anything. This man described to another friend, it was great they both came over, but I couldn't wait for the first one to leave. And for the second one, I wish he never would have left. Because what do people need? I'm sure all those scripture verses were well intended, and they were all right, but timing is everything. People aren't in their heads then. They're in their heart, they're in their emotions. And they just want to be cared and nurtured, someone to walk with them and be present. That's all that's necessary. When every effort is made to manage stress and grief effectively and someone continues to struggle or even decline, now remember there's timing in here. We're not going to hurry things up. Grief is a process. We have to allow people to go through it. But if we see them getting in a difficult place, it might be time to connect with a therapist, a physician for evaluation, consider a spiritual advisor, even medication. Being evaluated for depression, adjustment disorder, among other things, can be really helpful. There are some people in Christian community, I think it's been changing over the decades, that resist counseling. If you have enough faith, you should be able to get through this. Throw that out the window, because it's not true. God knows our humanness. He provides people to help us. He works through people to help us. Some people are opposed to medication. Well, we're in the throes of grief and going into depression and anxiety. The brain chemistry can get really whacked out. Medication can correct that and then give the people the wherewithal to take those steps they need to take. I worked with somebody recently, I was actually a new client, and I said, I really think you're depressed. All the things this person was describing about his life, I said, I can't prescribe medication. I really want to encourage you to see your doctor. Doctor next day went, saw him in 2 weeks, so I went, got medication, and the wife said, "This is amazing." 7 days after he started, he's a different person. And he said, "I know this isn't the cure-all. I know I have to work on those things that took me there, and I want to do that, but now I feel like I can." So we want to be supportive of people going through those kinds of things. If ever we find someone has declined and is talking about life isn't worth living, people would be better off without me, they may not come out and say, "I'm thinking of taking my life," but you can hear it, you can read it, especially if they have a plan. I have pills in my drawer. That's an emergency situation. Call 911, take them to the ER. Suicide is often impulsive. It's not logical, it's not rational. Again, one of Satan's greatest deceptions. But yet, you sometimes have to act quickly on that. Well, as we close, we want to remember what Christmas is all about. It is a time to celebrate the God who loves us and gave us the greatest gift of all, a Savior who brings hope and joy and a promise of eternity where we will not walk the broken road, but streets paved with gold. What a wonderful thing to look forward to. Well, any comments or questions on all the things I've shared with you? And a hush falls over the crowd. These subjects are complex, they're difficult. I hope some of these steps are helpful. There's a lot more information out there, and I hope you'll consult people if you need to. The Counseling Center is one of them. But thanks for showing up.
Thank you.
Now it's time to go to sleep.
I just wanted to thank Amy and Bill for coming tonight. I think that was very good information that you shared.
Yeah, thank you very
So
much.
thanks again.